What I need you to do is put the knife down for me.
Across the country, cameras are capturing criminals in the act.
Oh, please! Help me now!
From those on the attack to those under the influence.
Sir, I need assistance. I need assistance.
From those on the run.
You're under arrest for suspicion of fraud.
To those picking a fight. Cameras see it all.
I'm Nick Wallace, and I've been reporting on crime for more than a decade. In this show, I'll be revealing how cameras help put criminals behind bars and keep Britain safe.
Whether you're an international drug smuggler...
It was carrying £500 million of drugs.
Armed robber...
They did not know whether they were going to live or die.
Or simply making a run for it, it's hard to hide from justice.
The dog will not bite you if you comply with my instructions.
If you're caught on camera.
Welcome back. This time we're looking at brazen criminals, those who operate often in public without shame or remorse. That is, until they're caught on camera.
We've got the men who robbed and killed a drug dealer and then spent the proceeds at a brothel.
Essentially what they did was they killed him, 1 stab wound, they took the drugs and they took everything they wanted.
We've got the woman who was unfit to drive but did so anyway, flipping her car with a 20-month-old child inside.
I've seen some things in this job, but with the look on this child's face, it was haunting.
And the shopkeeper who wasn't prepared to hand over his takings without a fight. But first, the brazen theft of a motorbike in central London. In broad daylight, while one man wields a hammer, another uses an angle grinder to remove the lock off a £40,000 superbike. The criminals attempt to scare off the innocent bystanders as they try to intervene. One of the thieves attempts to ride the motorcycle away while the other follows on his scooter. But neither get far. As members of the public fight back, the motorbike is ditched before the pair finally manage to escape. But both were later arrested for a spate of robberies across the capital. The criminals got more than 15 years in prison between them.
Next, a shocking accident caught on camera. The woman was driving with a 20-month-old in her car when it careered across a roundabout and flipped 12 feet in the air. A dashcam captured the accident, an officer's body cam the aftermath. The question was, what had caused it?
The A605 in Peterborough. A dashcam on board a lorry captures this car overtaking it at speed. As the vehicle approaches the junction, it passes another lorry and hits the roundabout, throwing it 12 feet into the air. PC Dave Tudman was one of the first policemen on the scene. His body cam reveals the devastation he was greeted with.
We were initially a bit perplexed as to why there was so much damage on what is a relatively low-speed exit from a roundabout. And then, obviously, when we saw the dash cam, that was just shocking.
The driver was a 32-year-old woman who was travelling with a 20-month-old child in the back seat.
Certainly as a father of 3, it sends chills down my spine when you see that there's kids involved, especially high-speed impact.
Before the emergency services arrived, lorry drivers had rushed to the scene and rescued the toddler from the car.
The child just looked terrified, clinging on to the truck driver for dear life. I've seen some things in this job, but with the look on this child's face, it was haunting.
Incredibly, despite the high-speed impact, the child was physically unharmed. But the woman, who'd been cut from the wreckage, suffered serious injuries.
The driver's come down this road and then has hit the roundabout, hit that tree about halfway up, and then has landed just here. So you can see it's quite a long distance from takeoff to landing.
With the body cam still running and satisfied that the casualties were being looked after, Dave's main priority was to gather evidence to work out what had caused the woman to lose control of the car.
Just here is the fresh tyre marks bleeding directly towards the signage on the roundabout. And you can see actually there, it's quite a steep ramp. And this is the tree that the vehicle struck. You can see where the partial part of the bumper is left. What's important here is what you can't see. There's no markings on this roundabout from that vehicle. She's done all this airborne. And this point here, that's the first point that the vehicle lands. And that's a long way. So it gives you some indication there of the speed that she was travelling.
Dave was puzzled as to why the driver would have approached the roundabout so quickly, especially with a child on board.
Why have they travelled into that hazard at such a high rate of knots? We were potentially looking at medical episode, mechanical failure.
As Dave approached the crash site, he spotted a clue.
This was debris collected by some members of the public, put to the side of the road, and the first thing that's come to my attention is the bottle of vodka. And at that point, I'm starting to think, okay, is this why the collision's occurred? Have I got a drink driver here?
Dave needed to obtain a breath sample to see if the woman had been drinking before she got behind the wheel.
The driver was belligerent, would feign being unconscious every time I tried to get a breath sample. I spoke to the ambulance crews and said, look, is there any reason? They said, no, she's been absolutely fine. But strangely enough, every time I tried to get her to provide me with a sample of breath, we went unconscious.
With the driver refusing to cooperate, Dave had to wait until a blood test could be taken at the hospital.
When the results came back, it was calculated that she was 3 times the drink drive limit at the time of the collision. We found out that the bottle of vodka had been bought en route. So from our point of view, we were drawing the conclusion that she had actually been drinking whilst in the car and driving it. How anybody could think that that was an acceptable standard of behaviour, to drive a car 3 times the drink drive limit with her child on board. I mean, how she didn't kill herself and the child, I'll never know. Pure luck. Just pure luck.
The driver pleaded guilty to dangerous driving and driving under the influence of alcohol and was sentenced to 6 months in prison.
The judge was able to see in graphic detail exactly what had happened, and I think the sentence sends out a real strong message to anybody else that thinks that it's acceptable to drive a car whilst drunk with their child on board.
Coming up, the young man murdered in cold blood and the hunt to find his killers.
You've already got one murder. You definitely don't want any other members of the public to get harmed.
And the football fans who turned on each other when their team lost the match.
The outcome of the game can have a huge impact on fans' behaviour and can result in violence.
After hours or before closing time, fights inside and outside pubs and clubs are a common sight in Britain. In this next set of clips, we see them all. But what drives this destructive behaviour?
May 2017 in Cleethorpes, Lincolnshire, and a young man is refused entry to a club. Instead of calling it a night, he lashes out at the door staff. Removing his top, it's clear he's looking for a fight, and some of his friends arrive for backup. They also square off against the door staff, but police are already on their way to the scene. Dr. Ruth Tully is a forensic psychologist and an authority on violent criminal behaviour.
Now, as a forensic psychologist, you've seen your fair share of fights and aggression. What do you read into what's going on here?
Well, rejection can seem like a much bigger deal if someone's been drinking alcohol. Alcohol influencing someone's thinking can really exaggerate those emotions and exaggerate those hurt feelings. What's really interesting about this clip is the way that the man takes off his shirt in a way that suggests he's prepared for aggression, he's ready for a fight. He's putting on a display of masculinity.
There's a growing crowd watching what's happening here. That makes things worse.
Certainly it seems like a show is being put on here for the people around. They might be very concerned about who they're with. Does it show them to be weak if they don't react? Particularly if they want to come across as masculine, aggressive and powerful.
In court, 3 men pleaded guilty to a fray. They were given suspended sentences and ordered to carry out up to 250 hours of unpaid work. Group dynamics can also fuel violence. July 2016, at a pub in Staffordshire, a group of Stoke City fans are drinking after being beaten in a pre-season friendly match against Burton Albion. CCTV captures the moment violence erupts within the group. It quickly descends into a free-for-all. Punches are thrown, and bar stools and pool cues are used as weapons.
You've worked with people who got caught up in football violence. To what extent can a game affect fans' behaviour?
The outcome of the game can have a huge impact on fans' behaviour. Desire to win and come out on top can make these things so much more serious. That shared aim and shared goal can result in violence.
In this case, the fans turned on each other and caused thousands of pounds worth of damage to the pub.
This is a group mentality.
Yes, it definitely can be. So some people might be involved in violence more generally outside of this setting, but other people are so strongly influenced by the people around them that outside of that setting they might not be involved in violence at all. There's a diffused sense of responsibility. So it's seen that if one person's doing something like violence, another person doing it isn't as bad because everybody's doing it.
11 men were given fines and suspended sentences after being found guilty of violent disorder. They were sentenced to over 2,000 hours of unpaid work and curfews, preventing them from attending any Stoke City matches for 6 months.
When police found the body of a young man who'd been stabbed, it was unclear who the victim was or why he'd been killed. But their investigation would soon reveal his links to a drug gang and criminals prepared to do anything to get their hands on cash. CCTV would play a key role in this case.
Southampton 2017, 1:30 a.m. on Saturday the 11th of March. A young man gets out of his car at Gilpin Close in a suburb to the east of the city. He's attacked and stabbed in the chest. Minutes later, the victim's found by a member of the public who tries CPR. He's rushed to hospital, but dies of his injuries. Hampshire Constabulary launched a murder investigation headed up by Detective Chief Inspector Liz Williams.
He had a severe stab wound to his chest. He had no identification on him. Nobody had any idea who he was. He had a minor graze on his face and a minor graze on his leg. But otherwise, we didn't know anything at all about him.
The police had no idea of the perpetrators either. This wasn't an area known for knife crime.
This was a major event. It was unusual. There's knife crime right across the majority of cities, but there's nothing specific to that area at all. This would have been really, really unusual.
With no wallet or identification on the victim, for the police, the first task was finding out who he was.
When you start with not knowing anything, you grab onto anything you do know with both hands because it actually gives you a lead to pursue. At the scene, there were a number of vehicles parked up in the edge of the close. An Eagle Eye police officer actually spotted that one of the cars had no condensation on it. It looked like it arrived very, very recently. Also, that car had its window 3/4 down. They checked that vehicle on the police national computer and it came back to a gentleman called Alessi Bianchi.
A mobile phone was also found near the scene. Inside, an ID card bearing the same name and a photo matching that of the victim. But then the mobile phone began ringing. On the line was a woman desperate to speak to a man with a different name.
The person on the end of the phone was trying to find her fiancé. So we realised that the person that owned the phone with the identification of Alessi Bianchi was actually Genny Doughty.
Shkelzen Genny Doughty was a 21-year-old Albanian. He'd used the fake Italian ID to enter the UK illegally. The police now had the victim's name, but what was he doing in Gilpin Close that night? The phone would soon provide more information.
Initial examinations of his phone were such that you could see transactions, and the fact he was there suggested that he was dealing drugs.
It looked like Doughty was part of an organised supply gang. Albanian criminal networks dominate the so-called dialer drug delivery market across the UK. This police body cam footage shows a raid on a neighbouring gang's property in Sussex.
The customer will phone or normally text the drug line. The drug line will then dispatch one of the runners, almost like a taxi company, and the drug runner then will go out, do the deal.
Doughty was one of these runners and was working on the day he was murdered. With the help of his phone, CCTV and automatic number plate recognition cameras, the police traced his final movements. A text on his mobile showed his shift started at 6 a.m. Cameras at Itchin Bridge captured him entering Southampton shortly after 11 in the morning. And he was seen again in nearby Eastleigh at 3:30 p.m, paying for fuel at a service station. Doughty was receiving text instructions telling him where to deliver cocaine.
Eli, who is the controller, sends Doughty to Gilpin Close, 0052. Eli saying, "How long will it take you?" Doughty replies, "Call me G, I'm at the venue." A minute later, what he texts then is, "God, I hope he gets 2, as these 2 are my last." What we say that means is he's only got 2 wraps of cocaine left. I imagine that when he gets rid of those last 2 wraps, that's the end of his shift.
This would be his final delivery. Just minutes after sending the text, he was stabbed to death. Robbery seemed the obvious motive. At the end of his shift, Doughty would have been carrying a large amount of cash. But who were the attackers? Officers began door-to-door inquiries around Gilpin Close.
One of the ladies who lived there had heard some suspicious activity, some conversations, some banging. Ben and Mum were talking about 20 to 2 in the morning.
The owner of the flat claimed that 2 guests who were staying with her, Lee Williams and Christopher Jones, had suddenly left that night, taking her car with them. In the light of the murder, the men's disappearance meant they were now suspects. Police began a major search and 2 days later got their break. Automatic number plate recognition cameras picked up the black Ford Fiesta on the M54 near Telford.
It was difficult to ascertain exactly how dangerous these people were. We knew they were capable of it because obviously we had a dead body that we'd located. It's not just like a normal traffic stop.
Specialist officers stopped the car and arrested Williams and Jones. But this was far from an open and shut case. The 2 men denied ever having met the murder victim. A comprehensive search of the car turned up nothing to link them to the murder, and forensic evidence was scarce.
In this particular scene, due to the nature of the injury, we've got a single stab wound to the chest. It's quite slim and it self-seals, so you haven't got a massively bloody scene.
With so little blood, the chances of getting a DNA match were slim. And sure enough, Williams and Jones' clothes came back clean. With so little evidence, the police had no choice but to let Williams and Jones go on bail.
It's always disappointing to release a suspect, especially in a murder investigation. You've already got 1 murder. You definitely don't want any other members of the public to get harmed. We still had a mountain to climb.
Later, CCTV captures the men handling cash. Was this the money stolen from Genny Doughty?
Research suggests that some form of abuse has taken place in 99% of care homes across the UK. But the use of hidden cameras means many of these abusers are getting caught and prosecuted.
When a daughter employed a husband and wife team to care for her mother, she installed a secret camera for peace of mind.
Now, come on.
She was horrified to discover the husband and wife were abusing the woman in her 80s.
That's not fair, is it?
So the family of the victim installed the camera, really just to see how their mum interacted with the new carers that were coming in. They didn't suspect that they would see any sort of abuse occurring.
Now stop it! You're going to get told all week.
DC Mark Andrews, who investigated this case, is aware of the important role cameras play in bringing these offenders to justice.
It's hard to detect abuse in situations where at a care home or carers going in simply because the person is vulnerable. They can't report what's happening to them.
Thanks to the footage, the husband and wife pleaded guilty to ill-treating and willfully neglecting the dementia sufferer. The woman was handed a 38-week prison sentence, suspended for 2 years, while her husband was sent down for 28 months. In situations like this, being able to hide the camera in the room is crucial. We visited this camera shop, which specialises in covert filming.
Have you noticed an increase in the number of people coming to you?
Yes, a lot more, because people are more familiar with the technology that people can actually run themselves and find out, check the footage themselves. It's really easy now.
What sort of cameras do you supply?
And we do all sorts of different type of cameras, so some of them are already built into products, so like picture frames, we've got box files or CD boxes, or even a table clock with a hidden camera in there. Sometimes you can't introduce something new into a setting because the carers or whoever would be familiar with the room and they'll know, oh, there's something new there. So we customise into something that's existing in the room already.
What kind of responses are you getting from the families who come to you?
Sometimes it's just peace of mind and they were just wrong. Sometimes it's very heartbreaking, so they're very upset because they've seen or they managed to prove that, yeah, they were right, or their suspicions were right, that, you know, their family were getting abused at the care home.
It was a situation Lynn Nuttall sadly found herself in 2017. Her 95-year-old mum, Marjorie, lived in a care home, so she trusted she was being looked after. But when she suddenly started swearing, completely out of character, that trust was called into question.
She started using some pretty serious words, and I was thinking, where's she getting these words from? You know, and there was nobody actually around her that was using those words. So that was the first thing that alerted me to something wasn't right.
But it was when Lynn noticed bruises on her mother's wrists and was told by care home staff that she'd been fighting off her carers that Lynn decided to take action.
I thought, well, I need to know what's going on because I don't believe this. The change was, you know, was too much. So I decided I was going to put a camera in her room.
Lynn bought a covert camera, hid it under the television set and started filming.
You couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was just so disturbing.
The footage immediately reveals the source of Marjorie's bad language.
Shut the Marjorie. Shut the bag.
As Marjorie, who's registered blind, asks for her glasses, she's slapped around the face by one of the carers.
I mean, Mum's blind. She didn't even see the hit coming. You know, she wouldn't even be able to duck or anything. She didn't see it, it just walloped her.
As soon as Lynn saw the footage, she went straight to the police. The men were arrested. The two men pled guilty to ill treatment while working as carers.
To hit anybody is bad enough, but to hit somebody of that age and that vulnerability is just, it's horrendous.
The pair were handed 9 months suspended sentences, and thanks to the footage, they'll never be allowed to work in a care home again. Lynn now campaigns to make it easier to prosecute and punish the perpetrators in these types of cases. Coming up, the net closes in on Genny Doughty's killers as CCTV reveals just how callous they really are.
They are in the brothel, I think, around 35, 37 minutes. They're laughing and joking, and they don't seem to have a care in the world.
And the biggest ever crash for cash insurance case captured on camera.
It's really one of the most blatant cases of obvious fraud that you'll ever really see.
We're in the middle of a murder investigation in Southampton. An Albanian drugs courier has been robbed and stabbed to death in cold blood. Forced to release their suspects on bail due to a lack of evidence, the police are now on the hunt for more, and CCTV will play a key role.
For Detective Chief Inspector Liz Williams of Hampshire Constabulary, the investigation into the murder of Genny Doughty was as important as any other.
The fact that Genny was an illegal immigrant who was actually committing crime at the time of his death is immaterial to us. We don't judge people who get murdered or have crimes committed against them. They're all victims.
Police believe Doughty's last customers might have been his killers. They suspected Lee Williams and Christopher Jones, but needed to prove it. The detectives studied their phone records and found one number especially interesting.
The 344 line was a popular cocaine drug line in the Southampton area, and that was passed to Williams and Jones by friends.
At 12:30 on the night of the murder, Williams called and texted the number. As suspected, he was Genny Doughty's final delivery and most likely involved in his killing.
They were the reason that Genny was in that area at all. You have to go with what is most logical.
The courier would have been carrying hundreds of pounds in cash, as well as his last 2 wraps of cocaine. But when the police arrested Williams and Jones, they found nothing on them. If robbery was the motive, where was the money? Officers began examining the men's finances. Williams was working in Reading and Jones was unemployed. They were cash poor and had recently started scrounging off a woman living in the area where Doughty was murdered.
They were scamming her, really. Williams was supposed to be her boyfriend. What we showed was he was driving her car all over the country prior to the offence, and she was paying for the petrol. He was sort of milking her for everything he could get.
On studying Williams' bank account, it was obvious why.
We're able to show that Williams had earlier gone to the bank. He had no money. I think he'd withdrawn the last £6 he had, ended up with pence in his bank account. So we knew that they had no money before the offence.
CCTV on the night of the murder backed up the theory. Williams and Jones were captured entering a pub near Southampton city centre, where they met Williams' girlfriend and another woman. But roughly half an hour later, both men left.
The girls bought them drinks on the evening. They didn't have any money. There was an altercation in the pub, and Williams had told her that he was going to go, and he told her where her key was going to be left. So she got home and found out they completely cleared out.
It was clear that Williams and Jones were broke when they returned from the pub to Gilpin Close. But if they had gone on to kill Doughty when he delivered the drugs, they would have had cash to spend afterwards. To discover where, police used their mobile phones to track their subsequent movements.
Once you find out where people have been, it means you've actually got a map, metaphorically, to look at where you can look for your evidence. So they leave Southampton and then they travel north on the M3.
Williams and Jones then entered Reading, where they began ringing escort agencies and brothels. At 4 a.m, CCTV footage shows them entering one of those brothels on the Oxford Road in Reading.
They are in the brothel, I think, around 35, 37 minutes. The CCTV shows their demeanour to be laughing, joking, not a care in the world. They've both got a bottle of beer in their hands. Obviously, they go off and utilise the services of the ladies there. Come back, they're laughing and joking, and they don't seem to have a care in the world.
Of particular interest to the detectives was the moment that Williams pays the receptionist at the counter.
When we got this, we were absolutely delighted. The key bit, first of all, for me was the money it showed. It showed a massive amount of money, all different denominations, and showed that they had that in their possession.
Detectives were sure they'd stolen this cash from Doughty.
We knew that they had no money before the offence, and after the offence they had money, and that was a really key thing. Another nail in the coffin.
Cameras also caught Jones handling money as he tried to book a hotel room for the night.
The receptionist quotes the amount of money it is for the room. Jones is quite happy to get that out, and he gets the money out. When the receptionist then asks for ID, that's when the transaction fails, because Jones thinks that's not for him. What this shows is that it's not just Williams with the money in the brothel. This is Jones with his money in his pocket. It shows they shared the profits of the robbery.
But the police still needed to link the pair to a murder weapon. They returned to the address where the men had been staying in Southampton. The owner of the flat reported 2 kitchen knives were missing from the property.
In the flat, there was one of these knife blocks with all different colour knives, and we know that there were 2 knives missing. It was a red knife and a yellow knife.
The officers wanted to see if one of the missing knives could have been used to kill Doughty. They bought a replica set to see if either knife matched the wound. The pathologist first examined the larger knife.
The yellow knife was too thick to have caused the injury, because it wouldn't have been able to go into the body at that depth without being too wide to have caused the injury.
But the pathologist's report for the red knife was a different story.
Look at the red knife here. If we go along 8.5 centimetres, it is 2.7 centimetres in depth at that point, which indicates this knife is the knife, or one very, very similar, that's caused it.
With this evidence, police were confident they had a complete picture of what happened.
Jones and Williams had a knife each. They called the drug number that night knowing they had no money to pay for drugs. Essentially what they did was they killed him, 1 stab wound, they took the drugs and they took everything they wanted.
Both Williams and Jones were charged with murder. Williams admitted carrying and using the red knife in self-defence, but denied murder. Jones denied all knowledge of the crime. In October 2017, the 2 men went on trial at Winchester Crown Court.
This was very much a two-person offence, and I wanted both of them. But within any case you put to a jury, it's 12 of our peers. You don't quite know what you're going to get.
But when the prosecution began its case by showing the damning CCTV evidence, any doubts about a conviction began to fade.
To actually watch that CCTV and look at the money and look at the way the suspects were interacting with each other, interacting with the girls, the fact that they were there paying for sex with the money they'd stolen off someone they'd murdered, the looks on the jury's faces when they saw the two suspects laughing and joking, it was a really, really moving moment in the court.
The defence knew they'd lost the jury. Shortly afterwards, Williams and Jones changed their pleas, and both admitted manslaughter and robbery. They were sent down for a total of 40 years.
It's always really tragic when someone loses their life. There's mass violence with cocaine dealing right up and down the spectrum. We will do everything we possibly can to bring the people to justice that have committed a crime of this type.
Insurance fraudsters make false claims of more than £1.3 billion a year, pushing up premiums for us all. One of the most common scams is drivers staging car accidents. But the single biggest crash-for-cash fraud ever attempted in the UK was foiled because it was caught on camera.
Cardiff, May 2014. A bus full of passengers makes its way through traffic. Suddenly, it's hit from behind by a silver Volkswagen. CCTV captures the aftermath inside the bus. Some of the passengers appear to be holding their necks and sides in pain. But the behaviour of those injured soon raises suspicions.
The bus driver, she called police and ambulance service to attend to the passengers who said they were suffering some injuries. But oddly enough, before the paramedics arrived, all those passengers who said they were suffering declined to take any medical treatment at the time.
In total, there were 8 passengers who said they'd been injured and started making claims against the driver's insurers.
The claims began to come in for personal injury, things like whiplash. The claims were for in excess of £50,000 in compensation and in medical treatment. So really quite significant, and that's just from one very minor collision.
The insurance company being asked to make the payouts suspected this was a case of crash-for-cash fraud. It had suspicions the driver of the vehicle had purposely driven into the bus and the 8 passengers were faking their injuries.
A staged crash-for-cash scam occurs when 2 cars are deliberately crashed together by fraudsters. And the sort of things that insurers will be looking out for is multiple claims for physical injury, which are typically for whiplash, which is very difficult to disprove. And the physical injuries that they purport to have suffered may be out of all proportion to the severity of the impact.
City of London police fraud investigators were called in and immediately pulled CCTV from the bus.
The bus is quite crowded, actually. We've got a fair number of passengers sitting, or some of them are standing.
At the moment of impact, the behaviour of some of the passengers immediately stands out.
Everyone's looking around, but the only people who are indicating that they're at all injured is our 2 guys in front. One of them's already put his hand to his neck, as if he's been injured. And then his friend seems to be doing the same thing. Perhaps he forgot his lines. He should have done that earlier. But again, only making a token gesture, really. And then all of a sudden he's forgotten the pain in his neck. He's interested in looking around. Compared to our suspects, the other passengers, none of them are displaying any signs of injury at all.
CCTV was fueling suspicions that some passengers were making fraudulent claims, and footage from the back of the bus put the car driver firmly in the frame too.
You can see the silver car following the bus.
The driver remains behind the bus for some time, before crashing into the side of it twice.
The CCTV showing what the car was doing in terms of following the bus and then deliberately moving in to strike the rear of the bus is very compelling.
But fraud investigators needed more evidence before they could be sure this was fraud. They discovered the silver Volkswagen was a hire car, a tactic often used by crash-for-cash fraudsters. Their investigation of the driver was also very revealing.
We were able to establish social media connections between the driver of the car, across Facebook with some of the passengers on the bus, the suspect passengers on the bus. That does raise alarm bells.
Detectives concluded that with the help of his contacts in a local claims management company, the driver had hatched the plot to stage the accident so his friends on the bus could claim against the car hire firm's insurance.
We have seen, really quite often claims management firms being at the heart of conspiracies to commit crash for cash. They will be taking their cut, they'll be generating their fees from helping to push forward insurance claims.
Faced with all the evidence, the man admitted in court to conspiracy to commit fraud. He was jailed for 12 months and banned from driving for 2 years. Although the police suspected more were involved, 8 passengers made false claims and received either custodial or suspended sentences.
It's really one of the most blatant cases of obvious fraud that you'll ever really see. The largest single case that we've seen for crash for cash. I've no doubt they thought the CCTV footage would assist them in their claims, and that's why they put their hands to their necks, that's why they put their hands to their sides. But I think it backfired on them because they didn't account for the fact that innocent passengers just sat still and didn't seem to be affected at all.
Coming up, we've got the reckless driver who sparked a terror alert in Blackpool. The robber who got more than he bargained for when he targeted a newsagent. And an explosive end to the night on the streets of Grimsby. April 2018. In Blackpool, a car ploughs through a crowd before knocking a woman to the ground. And bars and clubs are put on lockdown as the driver speeds off through the streets. Flying round bends, he narrowly misses another member of the public before tearing through a pedestrian crossing. Appearing then to aim directly at another bystander. The driver still isn't finished. He smashes through barricades and speeds off out of view, leaving 3 injured people behind him. Police later arrested the driver. He admitted various charges, including drink driving and dangerous driving, and was sentenced to 5 years at a young offenders institution. Thankfully, all 3 casualties made a full recovery. You might think when coming face to face with a robber armed with a knife, most shopkeepers would simply hand over the contents of the till. But as one newsagent in Lowestoft proved, not everyone is willing to give up their hard-earned cash without a fight. And it was all caught on camera. 37-year-old Seaver runs this newsagent in Lowestoft in Suffolk. He moved here from East London 5 years ago with his wife and 4 kids, drawn to the quiet countryside and slower pace of life.
My missus like me, like as well, the place, nice and quiet, near the sea, nice air, fresh air coming, I love the place. I love the people as well.
Well, not all of them. Cut to March 2018, and Seaver's normally peaceful working life was shattered.
I was ready to go cash out, but the car coming, it's got a hoodie on it, pick up soft drink, and then it's put on the counter. It's giving you 50p cash as well.
As Seaver takes the cash, the man walks around to the side of the counter and suddenly pulls out a knife. He breaks down the door and launches himself on the terrified shopkeeper.
You're working hard. When someone comes give you money, it's not easy.
With £1,200 in the till, Seaver decides he's going to fight back, whatever the risk.
Wife and children sleeping. Nobody knows what's going on down here.
The 2 men battle behind the counter, and when the robber refuses to leave, Seaver threatens him with a bottle. But the robber isn't scared off, and instead grabs the till off the counter. A violent struggle ensues. Eventually, the robber makes it out of the door with the till. but Siva is hot on his heels.
I will shout them. People come help me. Someone robbery my home. I'll shout them very loud.
Siva's neighbour Paul heard the commotion from his living room.
Wife was on the settee and she turned around and said to me, I think Siva's in the street shouting. She said, that's unlike him. So she looked out the window and she said to me, quick, Siva's in trouble outside, he's fighting someone in the street.
Paul ran across the road, grabbed the thief by the neck and pushed him to the floor.
He kept threatening to kill me and rip my head off. One thing and another, and I think once he realised that he wasn't going anywhere, I pinned him to the floor, face down in the road, and just kept him there until the police arrived.
More neighbours ran out to help. And once police were on the scene, the thief was arrested.
It's quite an horrendous attack. I think Siva was a lot braver than a lot of people would have been in that situation. So, you know, it was a very serious assault.
For Siva, the enormity of the attack didn't sink in until he'd had a chance to watch back the robbery on CCTV.
He's dropped the knife by then.
Yeah, his nose off the knife. I was shocked. It's a little bit affecting. After that happened, a little bit affecting everything, you know. But a little bit scary, but I'm happy. Still, I love the place. Lowestoft is still nice.
The thief admitted robbery and possession of a knife, along with a separate charge of theft and assault during another incident. He was jailed for 4.5 years.
Finally, the brazen criminals who really should know better.
It's a quiet Saturday night on this residential street in Grimsby, when out of nowhere, a firework explodes in the street, just several feet from a passing car. The noise of the rocket left many residents fearing a bomb had gone off in the road, but luckily there was no damage and no one was injured. Although the culprits were never identified, local youths were blamed for setting off the firework. Next, the driver who swore he wouldn't pay for speeding. The driver fitted a device to his luxury 4x4, so this camera in Yorkshire couldn't record his speed, and gave it the middle finger when he passed for good measure, with his number plate still clearly visible. They tracked him down, and the driver was sentenced to 8 months in prison for perverting the course of justice.
That's all from us. Join us next time for more Caught on Camera.
From apps to protect your home to budget voice-controlled speakers. Get the lowdown on the latest top tech in the new series of The Gadget Show here on Channel 5, Friday at 7.